Alrighty dighty. I'm gonna try that again. Okay, hello family. It's Maya here, your favorite granddaughter, niece, daughter. I'm kidding, I'm gonna start that over again. Okay. Hi. Welcome everybody. We are all gathered here today to do an interesting project for the Mendelssohn Academy in Halberstadt. As some of us know and have been participants of, every year the Mendelssohn Academy does a project called the Open Jewish Houses, and what this does is an opportunity to memorialize and educate the community about the Jews that once lived in Halberstadt. And the idea of the open houses is to make visible the Jewish spaces that once existed or continue to exist in Halberstadt. And this is again to memorialize and educate the next generation about Jews and document the Jewish history that once existed and continues to exist. And with that, we are going to get into the project here. Obviously, COVID has created difficulties in terms of doing the Open Jewish Houses in person. And so the Mendelssohn community is doing a virtual exhibition online, wanting to keep this project alive. And so we are doing this Zoom call with our entire family, or most of our family, which is really special, to connect about our own Jewish history in Halberstadt and memorialize Grandpa Bernd's experience there and our ongoing relationship with that history. So we're going to go around and introduce ourselves. My name is Maya. I use she, her, hers. You can share your pronouns if you want. And I am Grandpa's third oldest granddaughter. Grandpa, it's your turn. So I'm unmuting.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Thank you, Maya, first of all, for taking the lead on this. I'm sure that Judah and Nicholas, is it? Constantine are going to be very happy with what we're doing. And let me just take a minute or two to just say, hey, it's great to see you all. And some of you have heard this before, particularly those of you who were in Halberstadt with me and so forth. But just to get back up to speed on it, the script that you all got on your email is Damn the Holocaust, Full Speed Ahead. That is a theme I've been using now for a number of years. And it's not meant to be flippant. It's not meant to be happy. It's meant to be making a statement about my life and about many people who I know who had a much tougher time than me, who is considered a survivor, but not compared to anyone who's been in the camps. So Damn the Holocaust, Full Speed Ahead is based on a historical event where Admiral of the Union Navy, who was blockading part of the Confederate ports, that told his ships to just go the hell in, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. In a sense, that's exactly what I decided to do a few years ago, is say, damn the Holocaust, full speed ahead. At the time that Elie Wiesel, who you all know of, died, and he was a full survivor and witness in the best sense. His books, he won the Nobel Prize for it, and so forth, because he was in the camps. He was a fantastic author. He was a survivor, and he spoke up. I never discussed my situation, nor Grandma's, and I know that Grandma spent time when she was babysitting to discuss some of the Holocaust background that we went through with Jacqueline and with Ali and with Dan when she was babysitting. And she had a lot of friends still who were part of the so-called Holocaust survivors, one way or the other. So she constantly had this in mind. I put it out of my mind. I mentioned it to nobody in business, in college, among friends, until, as I say, I began talking about it about the time, maybe a little bit earlier, when Elie died. So I'm glad we're doing this now for Utah and for Halberstadt, and at a time when there's a lot of resurgence of both Nazism, right-wing, and anti-Semitism in Germany, and as well as in our own country, which we've seen happening. So the idea is here that we all have to be witnesses one way or the other. The GIs who were in World War II are about the same age as the Holocaust survivors, and we all are dying out. I've been president of my class, as many of you know, at Columbia forever, and we're all about 88 years old at the moment, and some a little older, some a little younger, and that's about the age of the surviving GIs at the moment. So tonight, today, what the assignment is, as I understand it, is to give some personal reflections on my own background in Halberstadt, the way Grandma, my mom, and I got away, and to have all of you participate in your own reactions to both the Holocaust, those of you who've been to Halberstadt, how you feel about what's going on, and to our relationship within the family. So, Maya, you're in charge. Thank you for doing all this, sweetheart, and we'll follow your guideline.
Thanks, Grandpa. All right, I'm going to unmute you, Grandma, if you can just introduce yourself. It won't let me unmute you. Grandma, can you unmute yourself? There you go.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm Grandma. and Maya, do you want to talk about the questions that relate to me, or do you want me to just say that I have been a part of the saga since from the time that Grandpa and I met. And so in some ways I know little personally and a great deal family-wise.
Great. All right, I'm now gonna start unmuting people to introduce themselves. For some reason, it's being weird.
So I'm Jacqueline Brecher, the oldest daughter of Bernd and Helen Brecher.
I'm Ross Moskowitz, married to Jacqueline Brecher, son-in-law of Bernd Brecher and Helen Brecher.
I'm Sam Savage, second oldest granddaughter of Bernd Brecher and Helen Brecher.
Hi, I'm Emma Moskowitz, oldest granddaughter of Grandma and Grandpa Brecher.
Hi, I'm Jared Brecher, the youngest grandchild of Grandpa, who is my grandpa and grandma.
And I'm Sydney. I'm somewhere in the middle, a grandchild of Helen and Bernd Brecher.
I'm Daniel. I am Bernd Brecher's only son and favorite.
My favorite son, yes, indeed. And my favorite son-in-law is up in the left corner. Go ahead.
I'm Sharon Brecher, married to Dan Brecher, and mom to Sydney and Jared Brecher, and daughter-in-law to Bernd and Helen.
I'm Allison Savage. I am the middle child of Grandpa Bernd and Grandma Helen, who I call Mom and Dad, and mom to Ethan, Chloe, and Samantha Savage. And I actually do have a husband, but I guess he's not Grandpa's favorite.
He's my newest. He's my newest son-in-law.
Hi, I'm Ethan.
Oh, Chloe
I'm
joined
Bird
us. Hi, Chloe.
I'm Bird and Helen's oldest grandson.
Hi, I'm Chloe. I am Bern and Helen's youngest granddaughter.
Super impressed by everyone figuring out there. Okay, great. Thanks everyone for introducing themselves. So we're going to get into the questions that were prepared by the Mendelssohn Academy, and we're just going to go through them, and I will let you know if they're directly addressed to you or not. The first couple ones are for Grandpa, so Grandpa, I'm going to unmute you. And here we go. All right, Grandpa, what is your connection to Halberstadt? Can you tell us a little bit about your family's connection?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, the question was what my connection to Halberstadt? Well, I was born in Halberstadt in 1932. I had a brother who was born in Halberstadt about 8 years before me, but he died about 2 years before I was born in Halberstadt. And his name was Henry, and he went to school, to Hebrew school in Halberstadt, and he developed meningitis, which today would have been a piece of cake probably with penicillin and all the magic drugs, but at that time was the Dark Ages, and he died very young, obviously at about age 6 or 8, I forget now. And we visit his graveyard sometimes when we go to Halberstadt. So my connection there obviously is that I was born there. My mother and father, in other words, great grandma and grandpa moved there about in mid or early 1920s, and established and set up a business and set up a home, and again I went to some early schooling in Halberstadt. I had some Hebrew lessons, I believe, and that's about the connection that we have up to that point. So into the early 30s. And we lived there just about until Kristallnacht, which was 1938, when the Nazi stormtroopers invaded homes, took a good number of Jewish men right away from their families and sent them to concentration camps when it was a pure hell situation. My father did not come home that night from his job, from his business, and obviously my mother was very concerned, and as was I, even though I didn't really know what was going on. I was about 6 at the time. And he showed up early in the morning, alive and well, and he was hidden by an old friend that was not Jewish in his home. And while the doors were being knocked down by the stormtroopers, at least he was safe. So we went through Kristallnacht, and that in some ways energized our entire situation about getting the heck out of Germany, which had some other problems and so forth, and I'll be glad to talk about them later.
Yeah, so that's great segue into our next question, which is, the next question is, can you tell us a little bit about what changed for our family when the Nazis took over in 1933 and the ongoing dictatorship that proceeded?
Well, actually, since I was really a young child, and I remember a lot of situations of the time, but not too many details, including the apartment we had, my father, my mother, some of the friends, some of my mother's friends who actually settled in Washington Heights, where we initially did when we came to the States. Washington Heights was called the Fourth Reich. Nazi Germany was called the Third Reich. We were Upper Washington Heights, Upper Manhattan was called the Fourth Reich because so many German refugees settled there initially. So very little changed for us. My father was a staunch Zionist and wanted to move to Palestine. And we were set to go to Palestine. We had the airplane tickets and everything else. when my mom's dad, my grandfather, in Mamel, Lithuania, suddenly died, and there was a lot of estate to settle and so on. So we postponed our trip, our flight to Israel, to Palestine. At the time there was no Israel. So everything changed, and we ended up eventually moving to Lithuania because we had to leave Germany if we were smart, as most Jews did, who were involved in Kristallnacht, who were able to get away. So we moved then to Lithuania, to Memel, where my mother was born, and we were there for about 2 years before we continued our journey, so to speak. But Kristallnacht was the one in '38 that pushed all the buttons to make sure that we couldn't keep waiting for all kinds of visas and passports and so forth.
And do you have any memories of anti-Semitism at that time before you guys left Halberstadt?
I have quite a few memories. One of the ones that I always had was our shul, our synagogue, and where I was born, and some of you were there. The house is still standing across our synagogue. And what's left of our synagogue is just the wall when the Nazis took it over and they burnt everything down, and the mikveh which they found underground. That's left of the synagogue. But what I recall there was that it was a large, beautiful synagogue with 2 balconies, and I always wondered why there were 2 balconies, and the women sat upstairs was Orthodox, and the men downstairs. So I would ask, why are there 2 sections for the women and the men are down here? And I finally got the answer, and my father gave me the answer, and that settled it. He says, well, the first balcony is for ladies, and the second balcony is for women. And that was an answer that at least a 5-year-old, 6-year-old accepted. Okay, that's the way it is. So memories of that kind, of some very small issues. I remember our apartment, which was in the main drag of Halberstadt, over stores and so on, as many apartments were, and looking out the window and seeing all kinds of activities, busy activities. I believe that entire area was bombed out in World War II, but somehow the house where I lived, or my family lived, where I was born, which was across the synagogue, was not bombed out. And Maya was with us when we held an open house there, and people came from all over Germany to listen to my lecture, adults as well as children, talk about my background and what happened in Halberstadt and so forth, in the place where I was my family was when I was born. So I didn't suffer much at the time, except getting information and letters as when we moved to Lithuania. I remember my mother and my father opening letters, censored letters from the Nazis that came from various places in Europe where family members were either being deported or in some other ways being set upon by the anti-Semites, by the Nazis and so forth. We did not personally experience that, but we got letters which I still have in the files that I've got to go over, which have been partially translated, about what happened to some of our family members. My mother was an only child. My father had a brother, Leo, and Tante Minna, Aunt Minna, who lived in Leipzig, and we used to go visit there in the good days still, in the early 30s when Nazism was beginning, but we could still have our freedom. We went to Switzerland. We traveled, saw many, many friends. And I remember one of my favorite reasons for going to Switzerland was because the cousin there had an automobile, and I would refer to mein Onkel mit dem Auto. And since we did not have an automobile in Halberstadt, I always looked forward to going to visit where I could ride in the automobile. There are all kind of odd and small memories of my life and time. And for example, the time that we went to the Zandkrug, a very fantastic beach not far away from where we were living at that time, in Gogsdai, the small town in Lithuania, after we left Halberstadt, because we couldn't stay there any longer, and we had to go to Lithuania, and at that point have a visa and passport to go to the United States. A lot of the refugee families were spending a nice Sunday, I believe it was, on the beach when we saw flames in the distance, smoke rising. And it turns out that the Nazis came in on motorcycles and dropped some matches, lit matches, onto the one gas place in town and basically destroyed Gogsdye. It turned out that when we came back that night, that it was the other side of the street of where we lived on the main street. Ours was still standing, but the other side was totally demolished. So at least we had our papers and documents and so forth. And we had cousins who survived that and who we eventually visited many years later, grandma and I in Israel, who did survive in the camps. I'm rambling on, so just stop me, Maya.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question. You spoke a little bit about this already, which is about how your parents got to the point of wanting to leave the country and where you finally ended up going. And so can you talk a little bit about how you were able to leave the country and escape to the United States? And you can also talk a little bit about why your family chose the route that they chose.
Okay, you want me to respond now?
Yep.
Okay.
And I can repeat the question if you need me to.
Yeah, so again, we were on our way, since Palestine was no longer an option, since we had to go to Lithuania, to Memel, which was a free city within the borders of Lithuania, but on the water, to settle the estate. We then changed our direction to immigrate to the United States because Palestine was no longer an option. So we waited in Lithuania, and first in Memel, and then into the small town Gogsdye, and then eventually to another small town called Wurde, also in Lithuania, where I had a good close friend, and we spent about a year there. So again, I want to point out a few things here. When we got to Lithuania, we were trying at that point to get to the United States. My mother was on the Polish quarter. My father was on the Lithuanian quarter. My father was on the Polish quarter, and I was the only one on the German quarter since I was born there. But I was a minor, so it didn't mean much. So when my mother got the visa in the Lithuanian quarter to come to the United States, she could take me. My father was on a list of maybe thousands who were on the Polish quarter, which means most of them never made it. And that was the fault of the United States, not of the Nazis or Germany or Lithuania. The US had its own immigration limitations. So my father never was able to leave. My mother didn't want to leave him alone. And he said, you and Bernd go ahead. It'll be easier for me as a man alone to make my way in the woods and so forth. So we left eventually on my mother and I on a Cook's tour, which is like saying an Amex tour. We had a actual Cook's tour, which meant that we had train tickets on the first class in the Trans-Siberian Express, which you heard me talk about. We came across to Japan, where we spent a week. We were on top of the President Cleveland, of the President Lyons, had a lovely rooms there. So in a sense, we had a luxury tour, quote unquote. We were not being chased at that point, since we were still under some protection of having had a U.S. visa, which were allowed for both my mom and for me. My father, the last time we saw him was in the back of the train, and I was waving, and he was waving, and he told us he had an apple in his hand. He was eating that, and that was the last bits of food he ever had. And my little dog, Molly, my second dog, Mickey was my first dog, and Molly was chasing the train too and barking, and my mother and I were waving from the end of the train. And that's the last time we saw my father, although my father and mother communicated by mail for, I guess, about a year or so or more. And we heard nothing about him until World War II was over, and the Aufbau, a paper in the United States for which was an immigration paper for basically for German Jews, a German paper. They had ads, one display ad after another after the VE Day about people looking for each other, and there was an ad there that my mother saw, and she got in touch with people who indicated that they bore witness, and they were witnesses to what finally happened to my father and to them, who ended up in the Vilna ghetto, which is one of the big ghettos in Lithuania. And on September 15th, 1941, we learned later, my father and about a couple of hundred so-called Jewish, young, strong Jewish men were asked to go on a rescue mission for some Jewish children. And they did, they volunteered. We don't know how many there were exactly, but they were taken into the woods and shot, including my father, including half of the so-called young Jewish men in the ghetto. So at least we knew that my father did not have to go to the camps. He wasn't tortured. He was shot clean, just like a soldier was. But we did not find that out until just about my bar mitzvah in 1945. So my mother finally got that news, having been separated for almost 5 years. So again, I have a number of things. The more I talk, the more I remember things. So you have to stop me, sweetheart.
I will.
And go on. Some of this you've heard before. Some of this may be new to some of you.
Great. All right, so we're going to head to the next question. And so you mentioned you went from Lithuania, and then I believe there was a stop in between Soviet Union, then Japan, then the United States. So why did you choose to settle in New York, and what was your experience settling there?
Well, our destination was New York. My mother, believe it or not, had an aunt who lived in Seagate in the tip of Coney Island. And that was our final destination at that point. But we had to cross the globe completely around because they were already fighting between the Russians and the Germans. As we saw the troops, one day the Germans came this way, one day the Russians came this way. We got out just in time. And so the only way to go to the United States at that point was like this, because we couldn't just go like this because there was war already going on in the Atlantic. So we had to go basically circumnavigate the globe. So we went through all of Russia, Siberia on the Trans-Siberian Express. It was about 2 weeks on the train, which I loved, was fun, and including getting off once in a while and buying some special food on the train. And I remember the menu, which was always, today we have borscht and watermelon. And what do you have tomorrow? Oh, we have borscht and watermelon. It got a little monotonous, but we ended up in Vladivostok, and then we took a ship from there to Japan, to the western Japan, and then spent about 2 weeks in Japan, in Yokohama, Niigata, where we landed, but we were also in Yokohama and Kobe. We left, I believe it was Yokohama eventually, to go to the United States, but we were in Japan for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and there were a number of refugee families traveling, and we rented a room in the hotel we were staying in, a large space, and we actually had high holiday services in Tokyo in 1940. And what happened since I was a child, and I was always inquisitive, I asked questions and so forth. So when we got on the ship that took us from Vladivostok in Siberia, by the way, where the Russians were very concerned about our going on a Japanese freighter, so to speak, because the tour ship, the passenger ship between Russia and Japan was overbooked and left a day early, even though we had paid. But they put us up on a first class, so to speak, a tramp steamer, a commercial ship with sailors and captain, and they always took 12 private passengers. This was very common. So my mother and I were private passengers on a commercial Japanese ship. The Russians, when they helped us get over to the ship, when the transportation and so forth, made sure they gave us a big bag of black bread, pumpernickel, because we wouldn't be able to eat anything that were concerned in Japan. So we appreciated having some black bread with us, and we spent it took about 2 days, I believe, an overnight from Russia to Japan. We ate every night all the time with the captain of the ship and the other officers. There was my mother, myself. I was the only child there, and some others, and we were guests, and we had paid, of course, a cook's tour. So that was a very pleasant start, even though we missed the passenger ship, which we were told was so overcrowded that it was almost a death camp.
So then you got to the United States, right? You landed in California, is that correct?
Well, yeah, we landed in San Francisco. And by the way, this was October of 1940.
Okay.
And at the time, since I had run the ship, so to speak, the Japanese ship, and I asked questions about what is this, what is that, some of the Japanese sailors were very fatherly toward me, and I was looking at things underneath canvas and looked like guns and ammunition. When we came to the States and told people about these ammunitions that I spotted that were being shipped from Russia to Japan, and about the air raids, the practice air raids that we were going through in Tokyo and other Japanese cities. Don't forget, this was long before the internet. Nobody in the United States believed us. They couldn't believe that there were air raid practices going on in Japan, or that ammunitions were being shipped from the Russians to the Japanese. They were preparing for Pearl Harbor and World War II. We in the United States still had a Nazi Bund at that time, and we were not preparing for almost anything. It's amazing that we won the war. So again,
I want to make sure that we get back to the question, which was, so when you got to New York, what was it like settling in New York?
Well, we went from San Francisco. We took the cross country, the flyer. I have a number of papers and documents and menus. First class, it was great. Stopped in Chicago, where we spent a few days with family, including Halloween Eve. And I didn't know why everybody was burning things on Lake Michigan. They said, my cousin said, it's Halloween, you can do what you want. So they gave me some soap, and I was marking up cars with the soap. And then they said, run. I said, why? They said, but you're not supposed to do that. I said, you told me to. Well, okay. So I had fun. Then we went on from there to New York. And then in New York, we then went on in the city, onto Coney Island, onto Seagate, where my grandmother, Dora Rubin, R-U-B-I-N, Dora, D-O-R-A was her first name. This was my mom's aunt. And then they put us up in their house in Seagate for about, I forget how long it was now, but so we were with them for, let's say, about half a year. We had a lot of adventures there. So that's how we ended up in Brooklyn. And then we lived in Coney Island for about a year, which was a great deal of fun, with the Luna Park and with the Nathan's hot dogs and so on. The destination was basically because that was the only family, since grandma, my mom, was an only child. So she had an aunt, the mother of her mother, the sister of her mother. So that's how we ended up and why we ended up here. Eventually we moved to Coney Island, then we moved to Manhattan, then we moved to Queens, and so on and so forth.
So you moved around a lot throughout the city.
Pardon me?
You moved around a lot throughout the city.
Yeah, until we finally settled in Upper Washington Heights, where Grandma had many, many friends from Halberstadt and elsewhere. And of course, I immediately made a lot of friends in school. So that was easy enough, and Grandma got some menial jobs to help support us. And even though my father sent all kinds of things ahead, including a good stamp collection that he and I used to work on, and we had several thousands of dollars here and then, we were able to send bits and pieces to members of the family here, distant cousins, my Aunt Dora, that they collected for us, so we had some money to live on.
And so did you think that you were ever going to return to Germany like, did you think this was just a temporary visit? What did you think about that?
That was in some ways for my mom, unless she and some others spoke about it, was basically a non-issue. Germany at that point and for the long term would have been either demolished, or we would have been lost the war and we would be all killed in the United States by the Nazis. So it was never an issue. And so basically my thoughts always were that, well, we're in the States to stay, and the second that we had citizenship, 5 years to the day my mom and I became citizen, and we started to vote and never missed an election. So as I say, it was a non-issue for us because it didn't just happen. I don't want to mention names here, but Grandma's closest friend, who was actually with her when I came home from school, and she had just gotten the message about in Halberstadt of the death of my grandfather. Her closest friend also lived in Washington Heights, and her husband was always a good Jew and a good German, just like we have good Jews and good Americans. He believed strongly in German culture, in German literature, and was a German citizen, and many Jews fought for Germany in World War I. So I think he intended to eventually go back. Whether his wife, who was so close to my mom, ever intended, I'm not sure. Their son became a GI and eventually is buried in the same cemetery. Was the first Jewish ceremony since the beginning of World War II, the same cemetery which Maya, you visited with us, and Ether, you may have too, I forget now, where my brother is buried. That was the first Jewish funeral since beginning of World War II, and that was about 4 years ago.
Okay. And you had mentioned this briefly about learning about the fate of your father. Can you share with us how Grandma Betty learned about it and how it was relayed to you?
I believe I mentioned that earlier, sweetie, about the fact there was the Aufbau, the paper with the ads of people looking for each other after VE Day, and how Grandma spotted one of the ads and got in touch with these people who actually were there in the Vilna ghetto when my father was assassinated. So it's but word of mouth. Some people never find out. For example, just to put some kind of balance on it, Max Frankel, the former executive editor of the New York Times, was in the same boat as we were. He and his mom came ahead. Max was about 2 years older than I am. They also settled in Washington Heights, and their father, they had no idea what was going on till after the war. And amazingly, he walked out, meaning that he came out as a refugee after World War II, survived the camps, and came home to Max and his mom. So again, it's the luck of the draw in some cases.
And then, so sort of going over this history, how did you handle the experiences of your family as a child and sort of going into young adulthood and then sort of now as an adult?
I'm not clear on that. I don't want to ramble on, sweetie, so I don't want to take all the time.
Okay.
But basically what happened is, as I said, where we lived, where we moved to, and I became part of the community. I decided on my own while I was learning English. My mother knew English because she went to finishing school, so she was well educated. So she spoke English, haltingly, but she spoke English. As a matter of fact, made fun when we lived in Brooklyn of the Brooklyn accents, because her accent wasn't as bad, but was pretty heavy Germanic accent, and so it's something that again I went to school and therefore acclimated fairly quickly. Although even the Hebrew school initially, when we got there, they thought I was a German. They asked me, "Am I a Nazi?" Again, kids from the Jewish school, there was nothing really knowledgeable or discussed or known even by the Jewish community in Seagate, which was heavily Jewish, about what was going on or beginning to happen in Europe. So I'm not sure if I answered your question right now, sweetheart.
Okay. Why don't we move on? We have some questions for Grandma. Grandma, I'm going to unmute you. Give me 1 second. I think it takes a second. All right, Grandma.
Yes.
So the first question for you is, when and how did your community, whether it's like your neighborhood or the general Jewish community that you lived in the United States, began to understand what was happening in Europe and the atrocities of the Holocaust?
I have to tell you that I can't answer that. And part of the reason is that I was 3 years old when my father volunteered for World War II. So my perspective was from that point of view. He left when I was 3 and came back when I was 7.5, a long time. We lived with my grandparents in a totally non-Jewish neighborhood, and I have no recollection of conversations about what they did or didn't know about what was going on in Europe. So, and I have a feeling that if there were conversations, they were careful not to include me.
Mm-hmm. And so do you remember like when you started to learn about it? Like even if it wasn't during that point, but maybe personally when you were first exposed to that?
I think my whole memory of that is through my own family having nothing to do with anti-Semitism or the Holocaust or any of that. It was through the fact that my father wasn't there, that the letters that my mother got, you know, from him, occasional letters. Also, Grandpa mentioned chopped up with holes in them. For apparently, you know, maybe he said where he was or whatever in the letters. And that's my whole perspective. My mother and I, at one point, when I was in first grade, we moved from my grandparents to our own house in Northwest Washington. And we sort of developed a life there. And I say that to you because we had what was for me a very comfortable routine. My mother worked all during that time. But as an example, we had the habit of going to the movies on Friday night, and which is something that I obviously looked forward to very much. And one Friday night, my mother was ironing one day, and she slammed down the iron because there was a listing in the papers of the men, the soldiers who were coming home, and what ships they were on. And there was the name, and my reaction was, I'm not going to be able to go to the movies Friday night.
Yeah.
You know, I was at that point about 7. And so
that's okay.
So it's kind of a blank in that piece, yeah, of my life, yeah.
I have a couple more questions for you. I think your fingers are also on the keyboard when you speak, and so it makes a noise. Or maybe you're holding your glasses.
It's my glasses. Okay.
So the next question is, when did you meet Grandpa and how did you meet him?
Okay.
Sorry.
I met him in the late 50s. I was in college. And for the summer, I was working at the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology on the Walter Reed grounds. And what I was doing is I was working in the labs, making slides for medical schools, slicing eyes.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And he was stationed at Walter Reed at the Institute of Pathology. On his so-called tour of duty. And he can tell you more about pouring tea for the DAR and his other responsibilities there. And that's how we met.
And how early on in meeting Grandpa did you learn about his family history?
You know, when I looked at the questions, I thought about that. And I can't tell you exactly, but of course it was fairly early on in that he didn't have a father. And you know, you talk about your family, and he met my family, and he went back to New York when he could, and was obviously concerned about and devoted to his mother, who was alone. And so because of that, you know, I may not have known all of the details, but I certainly learned about the fact that his father had not been able to get out of Germany and that they were in the United States alone.
Mm-hmm. And this is sort of an interesting question, but did you notice any sort of special behavior from Grandpa regarding his family history, whether he was hesitant to speak about it or he engaged with it in different ways and necessarily just articulating it through words?
Well, I don't recall our having extensive conversations about it. It was obvious that he was very concerned and devoted to his mom. And that is a result partly of the fact that she was alone and the way she was alone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't recall, as I said, having extensive conversations until probably later on when our relationship was more serious and we were engaged and so on.
Okay.
And when I think about it, I'm sure Grandpa was not forthcoming necessarily about the details
mm-hmm.
at that time.
Yeah. Thanks, Grandma.
Yeah.
All right. I want to move on to questions for the next generation. So again, these are directed towards the children generation. Anyone and everyone can answer. No one is obliged to. And just put in the chat if you want to answer it, and I will unmute you. So the question is, what memories are there of Betty Brecher, and how much did she share with you about your family's history and experiences? So let me know if you would like to share. You can also raise your hand like this. All right, I saw Ann Allison's hand go up first. Hold on, it's unmuting you. Okay.
So it's interesting because I remember a number of stories that my grandmother told me, most of which occurred either when she was a child or when she and Grandpa were here. She didn't really talk a whole lot about what happened in between. I mean, I knew that she had a son who had, died of meningitis before Grandpa was born. I'm not sure if I learned that from her or from Grandpa. But, the stories that I remember from Grandma, probably the one she repeated the most about being bitten on the lip by a dog. And she still had the scar to prove it. But she still loved dogs. I mean, Grandma adored our dog. The other great story is when she and Grandpa were first in Queens, and they were looking for a store, I believe. And they were walking, and they searched all over, and they'd been walking for a long time. And finally, Grandma said, we're getting into a cab. And Grandpa said, no, I really think we're close. And she said, no, that's it. We're getting into a cab. So they got into a cab and told the driver where they wanted to go. And he drove around the corner and dropped them off. And so that was one of the stories that Grandma always told us. And it was obvious that Grandma had had a tough life. She was very loving and very angry at the same time. And, so it was obvious that her history was not always good, and that she'd had some very difficult times, but I don't remember, maybe your mom does, but I don't remember her really speaking about that time in Germany.
Well, Daniel, I saw your hand go up. I'm unmuting you. Should be unmuted in a second.
Can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, like Allison said, I don't remember Grandma talking a lot about individual experiences. I was the youngest at the time, obviously. In some ways, I spent the most time in our house with her when she would come up from Queens and stay with us in Hartsdale, because I was the youngest. And as we got a little older, Aunt Allison and Aunt Jackie were more likely to go out, and Mom and Dad, as they do to this day, would often go out on the weekends on Saturday night. So I would be home very often with Grandma. Sometimes we'd watch TV together. In retrospect, I wish we interacted more when she did babysit. She would tend to go into the guest room and watch TV and close the door. And, had I been a little older, or maybe a little more precocious, maybe I would have been more proactive about interacting. And even when at times I was a little intimidated, because Grandma held her anger and her trauma, and sometimes was hard to approach in those times. Didn't change the fact that she was the most loving grandmother in the world. And some of our best memories were every single weekend when we would see her, whether she was coming to visit us in Hartsdale, we went down to her to Queens. She would bring bags of candy to all three of us every single time without fail. And she would go to the corner store and she would pick out individual candy, and she wouldn't always necessarily give us the same candy. And I think that's probably when I fell in love with Reese's peanut butter cups, and hasn't stopped to this day. She would often tell the story about her dog and biting her, which is kind of just interesting, because as everyone here has heard, and Grandpa repeated, the presence of dogs in our family's lives over the years somehow has kind of creeped in and been important at different times in all of our lives. And it's really just kind of interesting to us. But, Grandma was also, just like Grandma said, Grandpa was so dedicated to Grandma. Grandma was so unbelievably dedicated to Grandpa. And she was one of the few things I do remember her talking about, that she would talk about often, is how proud she was of Grandpa. And the fact that he had come over and, went to Columbia University, and, how hard Grandma worked to help send him to school. And, she was very proud of what he had done in his life and who he was and how he got there, coming over here and being in a obviously having had a very traumatic experience and history himself. So I remember that about Grandma, and I wish I could talk more about more personal anecdotes or experiences that she shared with me. Either she didn't or I don't remember them, but we did spend a lot of quality time together, and they're really nice memories.
Thank you. Oh. I got you. Should just send me in a second. There you
go. So, yeah, I think Grandma Betty was a study in contradictions, because she was so deeply loving, and as others have said, very deeply troubled for very, very good reasons. She had so much loss in her life that she really didn't have an outlet, or never found an outlet to resolve. And so the things that we shared, because I did spend a lot of one-on-one time with her, included, as Alan, Dan have mentioned, love of animals, which I think was easier for her than people, frankly. Love of theater, love of certain music, love of soap operas, which we spent many, many hours with, and debated about characters and talked back to the TV, and love of family. And the times that she did talk about her experiences in Germany and the Holocaust and Nazi Germany, came out in moments of anger and in moments of, frankly, traumatic flashback, where they were spurts of lack of containment, and that's how they would surface, and that's where we would hear pieces of what had happened, and then they would be gone, and we were children, so we were not really in a position to raise them again or know if that would have even have been the right thing to do, because there was so much pain there. She was so devoted, though, and there was so much love there. And we were richer for having her in our lives. So that's what I can say.
Thanks, Mom. I'm gonna go to one question. We'll come back to it. Some of you have already touched on this, which is when you first heard about our family story, but I'd love to know when you first heard about our family story from Grandpa Bernd. And this is again for the children generation. And if you can share what was shared or what wasn't shared. So just a little bit of this. And you wanna, oh, did any hands go up? Oh, hold on. Oh, and Allison. All right. And Allison, you went first last time. I'm gonna go on to it.
So who's talking?
Thank you.
Oh, me? Yeah, I mean, the story that I don't remember the first time I heard Dad talk much about his experiences. As Grandpa alluded to himself, he didn't really talk much about his experiences, certainly when we were young. But what I do take honor in is that I think I'm probably the first person to have heard the story, and maybe not, but I heard it in a very special context, the story of the last time that he saw his father. And when Grandpa told me that story, I don't even know that he set out to tell me that story, but it was at the time when we were about to drop our dog off, who we were giving away because Grandma and Grandpa were unable to continue to take care of him. And I forget if this is when I was going to college or if I was younger. And we gave a couple dogs away over the years. We won't delve into that. But in this particular experience, I was very upset, and Grandpa knew that, and he was trying to be comforting. And he told me about the time that he had to say goodbye to his dog. And the story started that way and ended with Grandpa crying, which is probably the first time that I ever saw him cry, and maybe one of a couple I could count on one hand in my experiences and memories, because it was the last time he saw his father. So at this point, everyone in the family knows that story, and it's an important story. But the way I heard it and learned of it was the first time, or one of the first times, that Grandpa really shared with me part of the raw history that he had growing up. And so that's not how I came to learn of his experiences, because of course I knew that he came over, and he came over with his mother, and that his father was not able to get out, and then of course that he had lost his brother early in life. I knew all of that, but this was the first time that I had a real sort of emotional discussion and learned a piece of Grandpa's history.
Thank you. Great. And Allison?
So that's really interesting because that's the first story that I remember hearing as well, but it was many, many years later. I heard the first time that I always knew, I don't know when I knew, but I always knew my whole childhood, my whole life, that my dad was born in Germany, and that he and my grandmother came over from there and had to leave his father there. So I knew that. But the first time I heard a story that involved what happened was when Grandma Betty died. And I can remember our old house, sitting there, and Grandpa was sitting in a chair right to the left of our piano, and started telling us this story about he and Grandma and leaving Germany. And that was the very first time I even knew that Grandpa had a dog. The only dog story I ever remembered hearing was the one that bit Grandma. And so that was really many years after Watson was given away. So, and I don't remember you, Dan, ever saying anything about it. So there was kind of this unspoken rule, I think, that, you know, we were never given free rein to ask questions about it. It was kind of known that that if Grandpa wanted to share, he would share, but otherwise we shouldn't ask. At least that's sort of the message that I got. And, you know, back to Grandma, I think the same thing that I was thinking this morning when I was thinking about this. It's funny, what you said, Dan, is that I wish that we were older before Grandma died. Because certainly I would have asked her a lot more questions and I wouldn't have been so scared of her. But yeah, that was the first time I heard anything about this. And then the next time I really remember learning anything was it, I don't remember, was it a special anniversary or birthday that Grandma had put all of the letters that Grandma had gotten together in German and was having them translated. And I didn't know that there were these letters. I didn't know that there was this kind of connection or, you know, history there. So it's sort of been few and far between. And the most information that I've gotten and the most I've heard has been through your generation, Maya, and my kids and Dan's kids. And which I think is often the way, is that it sort of skips a generation and you know, grandparents have a different relationship with their grandchildren. So, but it's just interesting because they've been the same stories, but at different times in our lives.
Thank you. Mom, you want to go? I couldn't see. Should I mute you in a second? There you go.
So I think growing up was a combination of knowing and not knowing. So knowing things in general and not knowing things specifically or in a more personalized way. So as Dan said, knowing the basic structure of the story, but knowing forever the ties to the Holocaust, and that's what brought our family here on Dad's side. And this dichotomy of, you know, we went to Hebrew school from very young, and that Jewish education was so important to both Mom and Dad. And Jewish education, at least in the conservative movement here in the US at that time, and the Never Forget, was you know, not very trauma sensitive. So their idea of Never Forget was literally to show grade school kids film after film of raw footage of the camps. I'm not kidding. And without any thought to secondary trauma. And so this is what we saw in Hebrew school year after year. So we have that coming at us in Hebrew school without, you know, separated from our families, and then no discussion at home about our own families' experiences or discussions to put that in context, but knowing that that is how we survived and how we got to where we are. And, you know, and go put that together somehow. And we go and try and figure it out. So knowing and not knowing at the same time. I think in 8th grade, in our school system, in our public school system, we studied World War II, I think, and we were to go home and actually interview our parents. And I thought, finally, I have a school assignment. I'm going to get some answers. And I sat down with Grandpa and asked questions that weren't as specific as these, of course, but some of them weren't dissimilar. And as Grandpa mentioned at the beginning of this interview, he wasn't ready to talk about it because his answers were basically everything was fine. And so, you know, I took from that just what he said, he wasn't ready to talk about it. So those were my answers for my assignment. And I got that. But luckily, when you guys came along, he was. So yay. Yeah.
Thanks, Mom. I'm going to combine the next 2 questions. And this is, again, for the children generation, which is, how did your family's history play a role in your childhood? And are there any values that Grandpa or Grandma Betty taught you that you connect to their experience and their history escaping Germany? Uncle Daniel?
So it's funny, I never really thought about that over the years, I don't think, but when I was reading your questions ahead of today, I came upon that question and it hit me, it hit me immediately and sort of connected in some ways that maybe there is a connection and maybe there isn't. But, you know, one of the biggest influences in terms of value system that Grandpa had on, I think, all of us, but I'll speak for myself, was certainly the importance of education, the importance of culture, his love of theater, his love of the arts. And part of that is because just who Grandpa is. Grandpa's a very intelligent, extremely high IQ individual who was not an academic, because he taught me early, you're not an academic, you're an academician. He's just somebody who always valued intellectual things. And, you know, maybe in a funny way, our family's love of theater and of culture and of food and of trying new things and doing new things, maybe that's what, you know, sent, you know, some of us into creative fields ultimately. I don't know. But, you know, what I did think about when I was looking at your questions, well, I always, you know, got those values and the importance of those things from Grandpa. And again, you know, education above everything. You know, when it came to the newest toy, you know, when I wanted a video game system or when I wanted a CB radio, which, you know, this was years before the internet and the way kids years ago communicated over the airwaves, that took me politicking and convincing and pleading and figuring out a way to get the material things. But if it was academics related, if it was private school, if it was the theater, if it was Broadway, Grandpa and Grandma wouldn't think 2 seconds about cost. Like, that's where those values were really important to them, and they passed it all on to us. What I did wonder when I read the questions was, you know, well, part of that is just who Grandpa is. I wondered if part of it was related to the fact that, you know, in his history, the Nazis destroyed everything. They destroyed, you know, freedom of thought. They destroyed culture. They destroyed artistic icons. They did everything they could to not just erase Jews from the face of the earth, but any representation of cultural achievement. And I do wonder if somehow that was part of the reason that culture, not just our culture, but knowledge of other cultures and education and the arts and artistic expression continued to be even more important to Grandpa. And to the extent that it did, that is in some ways the impact that his value system had on mine, and that it also may have connected back to his experiences in history, whether he realized it and was conscious of it or not.
Thank you. There's some construction going on. Anyone else want to share? I can't tell. Someone, do you both raise your hands? Oh, both raise your hands. Okay, great. And Allison?
So I would say that the strongest message that I got and internalized was the importance of continuing the Jewish religion. And although I am not a religious person, I'm very proud of the fact that I have helped to contribute 3 people to our religion. And there was no question in Dad's or Mom's minds that we should marry Jewish people and that we should have Jewish children and that we should bring them up in a Jewish household. And that's probably the biggest message that I got, and probably the thing that I'm most proud of as far as the religion goes. And what they do going forward is completely their choice. And part of my feeling about that is actually also because it was so strongly instilled in me by my parents that in some ways we really didn't have a choice. And I do believe that my children have a choice, but I'm also very proud of the choice that I made. So.
Thank you.
So
Now you can hear me, Maya? Yeah, you're in charge of this process, but I'd like to have some input from your siblings and your cousins. But basically, the first and second generation has spoken so far. I'd like to hear something from the third generation.
We have the next few questions are for the next generation.
Maya, why don't you check in on time though, and make sure you won't lose that you won't lose your contemporaries.
Oh yeah. How are my contemporaries doing on time? I promise to never call you contemporaries again. Okay. All right. Cool. All right, go ahead, Mom.
Okay. So values, absolutely. Education, dedication to the arts. In addition, I would say not being a witness, meaning not being a bystander, not being a silent bystander. That is not okay. That's been a lifelong journey for me. figuring out how not to do that. Also understanding how to play a role for other people in helping them achieve reparations where there should be. Having understood that, at least to some extent, from the point of view of Jews and Germany. And also understanding trauma and understanding that there was nothing particular about Germany that allowed it to happen there, so that when you see it beginning to happen somewhere else, you know what you're seeing. So very, very big lessons. And the last one, which is that love triumphs over all, and that you can lose everything and begin again. Yeah.
All right, we are now going to shift gears and ask some questions of the grandchildren. So the first question is, when did you first learn about our grandfather's story? And so do the little hand thing if you want to speak. I think Sam. All right.
So I actually very, very clearly remember when I heard it. I don't know exactly what grade I was in. It was either later in elementary school or early in middle school, and I actually did a school project we were supposed to interview a family member, and I actually recorded a conversation that I had with Grandpa about I knew kind of from Mom that, what had kind of a little bit of the background, that, Grandpa and Grandma Betty had come over from Germany, during the Holocaust. And, for us, that's something that's taught very early on in school. So we were, I think by the time we were all in school, that was something that was taught to us, in elementary school. So I knew a little bit of the background, but I kind of got the whole story. And for, when I asked the questions, Grandpa was very open to, giving the answers. I have a very clear memory in my head of, Grandpa painted that picture of, waving goodbye to his dad and his dog, on the train platform. And that's kind of the image that kind of sticks in my head that I've had since I did that interview. And it's kind of the story that I tell. I think that's kind of a lot of the emotion for it comes to me. I think that is a really telling, moment about what it was like for a lot of people to have to say goodbye to their families, that very stark, just literally waving goodbye the last time you get to see them, and knowing that might be the last time. So yeah, I got kind of most of the story. I feel like most of the things I've learned over the years since then have just kind of been little tidbits, but I really feel like I did get the majority of what it was like, for Grandpa when we had that conversation when I was, 10 or 11.
Thanks, Sam. I think I saw Sydney go up, and then we'll go to Emma.
Can you guys turn your volume down? Thanks. So for me, I'm sure you guys all know this, but our nuclear family are probably the most communicative foursome you'll ever meet. We go into deep conversation about everything in our lives, in our parents' lives, on the news, anything. So there was never really anything in my life that was not completely discussed outwardly and openly. But when I was in third grade, it was my first time in Hebrew school. We had just moved to California from New York, and I had gone to the local grocery store with my class, and I met this guy. His name was Fred, and he had his number from when he was in a concentration camp tattooed on his wrist. And I remember coming home and talking to my parents about it, and I made him a Hanukkah card that year. And that's when I heard the dog story from my dad. And that's kind of when that whole conversation really started, I think, with our family. Was Jared and I knew from that point on, it was an open dialogue, but I don't think my dad had as much information about it. And my conversation around the Holocaust really grew when I was in Halberstadt about a year and a half ago. And I remember sitting on the train leaving Halberstadt, going back to Berlin where I was staying, and I was on the phone with Grandma and Grandpa. I have no idea what time it was for them, since it was the middle of the day in Germany. And I think I talked to them for about 2.5 hours, and I learned so much. Yes, about Halberstadt and their life, and I heard stories from Grandpa, but it was also the first time that I felt that real connection to Germany and to Grandma and Grandpa, honestly, in that way. And this, I mean, I wish we had done this when I was barely able to contribute to the conversation. And I know that when I have kids, this is going to be something that happens from before they can contribute to the conversation. But it's definitely been in stages, learning about all of this with our family. Yeah. Do you have anything to say?
Oh, yeah, I was gone.
Thanks. All right. You should be, oh, there you go.
Hey, I guess my story is a little bit different because I didn't really learn anything about it in Hebrew school or school. No one really taught me anything, I guess, in classes and I just really started learning about Grandpa's story. I guess like just really small tidbits when I was a kid, but like not really enough to know anything about it. And I felt like the first time I ever learned about it, like even started to learn about it, was in the 8th grade. And we had a book for reading class about a fictional story. And so even then we weren't really taught much about it or like what happened, and kind of just left to my own devices with research when I really knew how to research something, or questions I asked my parents, or, kind of learning about things here and there from Grandma and Grandpa. And then, I learned a lot from Sam, I guess, growing up, because you kind of were ahead of me on that. But you did teach me quite a few things, and I kind of felt grateful for every different resource I found, because I really wish I learned about it in Hebrew school in a normal way or in school. And I wish my teachers taught me about it, because we learned a lot in history and things like that, but I guess not really about that. Just we kind of chose other things for some reason. But I'm grateful for knowing about it now. And I'm grateful for all the knowledge I've gained, and I'm grateful for the different resources who have lovingly taught me about Grandpa's history and history in general about this topic.
Thanks, Emma. Jared? Give me 1 second.
I don't remember exactly the first time that I had heard about it, either from Grandpa or in general, but I can talk to the more impactful time, which was around my bar mitzvah. I remember sort of talking with my rabbi, because we were supposed to meet a few times, and just learning about, not really learning about, but having the rabbi ask me questions about my family, and realizing stuff in my history that I didn't necessarily know everything. And I remember coming home and asking questions, and even learning things like the fact that I'm named after Jacob, my great-grandfather, Grandpa's dad, and that we share the same Hebrew name, Yaakov. But I remember calling Grandpa and talking to him, and at that point I had obviously known a lot about sort of the Holocaust and a little bit about his story, but I had talked to him over the phone, and I remember the first time he was sort of he was talking in the first person, which was sort of an interesting perspective for me, because you sometimes learn about things in school or even at Hebrew school, and it's all sort of easy to just think it was a long time ago, or kind of talk about people in the terms of statistics, but sort of talking to someone and hearing them talk about their own experiences and their own father and saying, I did this, I lived this, was really impactful.
Did he freeze? Give him a second. Jared, you froze, so we're not sure if you finished your sentence.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know where I froze.
Okay. If there's maybe just the last sentence that you said.
All I was saying was at the end is it was very impactful to sort of talk to Grandpa in that sense and hear in the first person, and definitely made me feel even more of a connection, not only to Grandpa and to that story, but actually to Jacob, which was weird because he was someone that I never met. And I kind of felt like that was the first time where I really had my own relationship with him, even though I was never given the chance to meet him.
Thank you. Anyone else? Ethan?
So I remember, similar to Sam, in fourth grade we had like this immigration unit, and we like went to Ellis Island, and I also interviewed Grandpa. I remember knowing the details when I was young, but I was always so like far removed from the history. Like there was nothing that really, that made it real for me. And I think it took me longer than others to like grasp the reality of it. I think that as I become more aware of like, how things are in the world now, and how like the bad things in history are not over. I think when I was young, it was like, oh, there was the Holocaust and there were wars like in the past, but like it's not like that anymore. But I think as I've realized that the present is like more and more, similar to the past, and there are like things that come up that connect to that history. And I think that as I've gotten a better understanding of that, I've become more connected to, Grandpa and his story. Definitely going to Halberstadt was when like I truly was able to kind of understand. I had no idea when I was little that like Halberstadt, was his birthplace, and like I found myself in Halberstadt with these like old buildings, like something out of like, a magazine or something, and I'm like, wow, like this is, like my heritage. That's when it really hit me, I'd say. And since then, it's just something that I think about a lot, and it's something that's really important to me. But it took a while, I think, to put the feelings behind the facts that I've always had.
Thank you. Anyone else? Go ahead.
So I think I'm probably the last one to know these stories. I really haven't learned any of the specifics until today, so I'm very grateful for this. But I never heard the dog story. The first time I remember learning about the Holocaust was probably in fourth grade, and I had to read a book about Anne Frank, and I remember reading it with my mom, and we were both crying, and I don't think I realized why she was crying so much when I was reading it, but I knew that Grandpa had gone through this, but I didn't know the specifics. So I think that I have a better understanding of that now. But yeah, I didn't really learn about Grandpa's story until recently.
Thank you. I will share briefly. I definitely learned about the Holocaust in school, definitely learned about it in Hebrew school. Learning about it from our own family perspective, definitely, like what other people have said, is stories here and there. The story that I think I connect most with in understanding that Grandpa was from Germany was through him talking about his brother, because he had that little picture of his brother in the sailor outfit next to the couch. And like we all sat on that couch all the time, all 7 of us. So that was always there. And I think that's sort of how I understood that, like, he sort of had this other life, like another point, especially because we never met his brother, neither did he. I think I became more inquisitive about our family in my own, like, curiosity about immigration and wanting to be academically and politically engaged in that space. And I think me and Grandpa have, over the years, have really connected on that, which has been really wonderful. And I feel really grateful for having the opportunity to sort of be someone as an in-between between the folks who have been dedicated to helping Grandpa uncover some of his family history and the documentation of it. And so I've been closer and closer to the history and the information, which has been really wonderful. Obviously, being able to go to Halberstadt was really the first time that I was able to hear it all in Grandpa's own words. Being able to be there with him was really remarkable. And I remember being there, and it was the first time that I heard Grandpa speak German. And I had no idea that he knew German. And I was like, holy shit, what? Like, and I was both like so excited, but so sad. Because I was like, wow, that's like a whole part of my family that like we didn't get to have. Stupid construction. You know, like I would have loved to learn German as a kid. And maybe I still will, but it was really miraculous to see. And, you know, Grandpa was like, it sort of just came to him, I guess, when we got there and people were talking to him in German. And that was really amazing. And getting to hear him speak in German and English, and like kind of like, you know how like Spanglish, it was like, I don't know how you would call it, but like German and English, and like would go back and forth and like in between, and talk about his story in that way too, was really cool. Yeah. So the next question is, we sort of already touched about this, which is, when did you, were you able to understand what had happened like during the Holocaust and sort of the, I guess, the grander scheme of things when you first learned about our family history? And if folks feel like they need to answer that further, just let me know. Okay. So then the next question is, does the knowledge about the history of your grandfather and your family influence any of your actions or decisions today? So again, this is for our grandchildren generation. All right, Chloe.
So I was never a really super religious person, but just knowing Grandma and Grandpa's passion for Judaism, as well as my other Grandma and Grandpa's passions for Judaism, when I got to college, I decided to join the board of Chabad, which has really brought me back to my Jewish heritage and learning a lot about the values that Judaism entails and things like that. So I think that their passion has rubbed off on me a little bit and has made me want to learn more about Judaism.
Thank you. All right, Sam.
So I think, you know, like Chloe, I'm not a very religious person, but I think because knowing, you know, what Grandpa went through and, you know, our family history, I think I have a much stronger cultural connection to it than I would otherwise. You know, I think I take this day and age, there's, anti-Semitism still exists. And I think I take, that a lot more personally because of, our connection to the Holocaust. And, in a way, having that connection almost makes it a bigger deal to me. I'm lucky in my day-to-day life that I don't have to, haven't had to experience, that in a very direct way, but I definitely do feel like a much greater connection to kind of the Jewish culture and the Jewish community because of our history. And it's just something that's much more important to me than I think it would be otherwise. And it's something that, I think at least culturally is something that I want to pass on to, my kids. And I really think it's the family aspect, the family history aspect of it that really, encourages me to do that.
Thank you. Go to Emma.
Oh, hey. So I think my answer is kind of a combination of everyone else's who's spoken so far, but coming from someone who's adopted into the family, it's like not having that blood connection, so to speak. It's like, for you guys, it's like I grew up with everyone. So it's like, to you guys, it may not seem like, oh, Emma, she's part of the family, she's the cousin. But it's like, for me, it's like I kind of feel this divide that it's like, from my biological Christian family and then my Jewish family. And of course, I feel closer with you guys. But it's like, I guess I've always kind of strived to build like a deeper kind of connection to you guys because I feel that divide. And because of that, it's like I went to Israel. I kind of try to build connections with you guys individually and like together and to learn more about history. And it was such a privilege going to see Grandpa talk about his book, which I am so eager to help with if I can, or read or anything at all. And I just want to kind of feel closer to the history in any way that I can. So I kind of just try to dig myself further in a positive way, because I feel like I really love you guys, and I really do feel connected to you, and I feel connected to the history, but I want to push myself further because of that divide, if that makes any sense.
Thanks, Em. All right, Ethan.
Can you repeat the question before I answer?
Yes, I can. The question is, does the knowledge about the history of your grandfather and your family influence any of your actions or decisions today? You could take that as however.
Yeah, so there are two big things for me. I think the first is that, my grandfather is a survivor, and, not only do I feel a desire to, keep, the Jewish tradition alive, I feel like an overwhelming responsibility. And, I'm a proud Jew. I was talking to my other grandmother about this, about marrying Jewish and, how that's so important to her. And I was like, I don't care about that, but my kids are going to be Jewish. And that really comes from, Grandpa's story. And I just feel like there's, we've just as Jews, we've been people try to break us down all the time. And I think that it's important that we don't let that, happen. And I hope that my kids one day feel the same. The second thing is, I feel a lot of guilt, because, you look at all these marginalized populations today, and it's it just, I look at that and it's that's what it was like for my grandfather. And now, as, a white Jew in America, I've had it pretty easy. And I'm very lucky for that. But it's, I struggle with the fact that if I looked a different way, then I would be discriminated against much more for being Jewish, like if there was a way to point it out. And I feel for those who, you know, are marginalized in society like Grandpa was. And it's just crazy how like similar things are now. You know, there's still a lot of work to be done, and I think it's important to make an effort to be a part of that solution.
Thanks, Ethan. Anyone else want to share? Sydney?
So I think for me, a lot of things that I do on a day-to-day basis come from the culture and the history that I've learned more about as I've gotten older, kind of subconsciously. So for me, I've taken multiple classes when I was in college about Judaism and Israel, and really begun my learning about that. In the past few years, as I've mentioned, I've gone to Halberstadt, I've gone to Israel. There's been a lot of things that I've done in my life. I joined this Jewish Resource Center at Michigan to just have a Jewish family there that I was with on a weekly basis. I've had my first Shabbat dinners there. So things that I didn't really realize I was actively doing that have become part of my day-to-day life. But it's been funny hearing from Grandma and Grandpa, but also from like my aunts and my dad and my cousins, to hear about how it was almost a rule in their generation to marry Jewish. But as scary as it is that all my cousins have brought up now marriage and carrying on families, that is the next step in making this Zoom call look bigger in the future. And I think that the "we must never forget" is something that we were all taught, but I think it's something that I've realized in the recent years that we all live by. And my boyfriend, who's an Italian Christian, he came over for Passover about a year ago, and I drove him home after, and before he got out of the car, he was like, I want to convert. I want this to be the life that our family has. And I think what I've learned is being Jewish is just as much what you say as much as what you do, and including others. And the most important thing in the world, I think, is having these conversations and really never letting, yes, conversations about the Holocaust go away, but also the culture that has so clearly been brought all the way from Germany to the grandkids now. So for me, I think that it's more about what happens subconsciously in terms of how Judaism really affects, and knowledge about the Holocaust really affects my life, and that I hope really continues for me in the future. Yeah. Do you have anything?
Yeah, I'll add something, Maya, while we're already unmuted. I wasn't even going to share, but it was interesting listening to Ethan, how he mentioned almost feeling a responsibility to continue sort of the family line, the lineage. I was talking to my dad yesterday in preparation of this, and just telling him that it's kind of weird being sort of the only, dad being Grandpa's only son and me being my dad's only son, sort of a responsibility to pass on the Brecher name specifically, and telling him that I don't want to be at the end of the line. I want to continue to be in the middle. And I think one lesson, obviously, that we can all learn from Jacob is how important it was to continue the family line and to make sure that his family was taken care of. And that's why he made sure Grandpa and his wife got out. And I think, obviously not something I necessarily think of every day. It's just something that's kind of a part of me and a part of my life, and sort of that need to carry on that tradition.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to share? I can say from my own perspective, Sort of what my mom had mentioned before, that like being a witness and being a bystander is not acceptable. And I think that is something that I carry on in my daily work, and is something that I've strived to be a part of in transforming the communities that I'm a part of. And I think I subconsciously became pretty engaged with immigration work because of our own family history and the Jewish diaspora. And the first organization that I worked for was HIAS, which is the agency that resettled Grandma Betty and Grandpa, and is a Jewish organization, or has Jewish roots. And I was surrounded by rabbis who work there, and they taught me a lot about like sort of this internal like Jewishness that happens, of like wanting that, like basically the Jews are like a displaced people, or have been for a long time, and that like there is this like Jewishness that like comes with like wanting to welcome others and protect others, and that is just sort of in our blood. And I hadn't really put that together until I had gotten involved. And I think that also stems from knowing about my family history. And I do think a lot about the grandpa's saying like, damn Holocaust, full speed ahead. And I spoke to Grandpa the night of when our new Supreme Court judge was confirmed, and like I was a mess. I had been working until like 1 a.m. the night before, something like that. And like he had said that to me, and I hadn't like really thought about it, but it's such a good saying to have, just because like horrible things will happen and they will continue to happen. But we really can't give up on trying to make whatever community or environment that we're a part of better, more inclusive and safer and empowering for everyone. And I definitely attribute the work that I get to do every day to those Jewish values and to the values that this family has taught me. Yeah. And I think that's our last question for the grandchildren. Oh, there's one for everyone soon, but we're going to do one quick one, and this is a good segue. And this is to Grandpa, which is, when did this, quote, boldly perky attitude of damn the Holocaust, full speed ahead arise, and what does it mean? That's you, Grandpa.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I may have touched on some of that previously, sweetie. Basically, the idea is that just like I never talked about the Holocaust or my own experiences with family and so on, other than with Grandma and with people that she was close to of her generation. But until a few years ago, when I decided the best way to do this is to not make a point that I'm a survivor, but make a point that I'm damning the Holocaust. And the full speed ahead has come directly out of U.S. history. And that's exactly what's been my own personal philosophy. I spent my life basically in working for and with, commercially, all kinds of not-for-profit organizations, including the International Scouts. I was in Mount Fuji with them. So this has always been something in my volunteer work, running for school, being a member, being president of the school board, being president of my class, being president of large societies, being an MC. All these things, in a sense, have been what you kids and grandkids have been doing too, which is basically my guideline is Tikkun Olam, which is help cure the world. And the way we do that is by helping cure what's going on in our own block. You know, people say politics is local. Indeed. So I'm very proud of the fact that so many of you, if not all of you, are really involved in doing good things, not because you're goody-goodies, but because these are challenges and they're good for you because they keep you on the ball. That's never stopped with me from the time I was little and doesn't stop now. But I just wanted to make sure that we get a couple of things clarified. Again, stop me if you want, Maya. The purpose of this today, as I saw it, was for the Academy to have something there involving a family that logically could today be a third and fourth generation Halberstadt family. My family didn't want to leave Halberstadt. Halberstadt was a great small community. It had about 60 or 70,000 people, about the size of Pittsfield. And, you know, it's something that we had no choice about. And I just want to clarify one or two things since we keep talking about it. Grandma being bitten by her dog. No, what happened, she was playing with the big dog, and she loved the animals, and she moved one of his food bins or something, his plate, to move it away, or the bone, whatever it was, and the dog snapped to get it back. And the snap missed a little bit and bit her on the lip. And somehow, when her dad wanted to then punish the dog, Grandma said, no, 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 he didn't mean to bite me. So that's one thing. The other thing is, just to fill in a little bit, Grandma was always very, very close to her mother. They went to the springs together in Baden-Baden and so forth, all the famous places. When she was younger, a little girl, and her mom, my grandma, had kidney disease and often went to the spas and so forth. And since she was an only child, they were extremely close. And when her mother died, when my grandma, who I never knew, died at age 45, Grandma always thought that she would have kidney disease and she would die at 45. She was almost sorry that she didn't. She was 38 when she and I emigrated to the United States. So she had about 40 years ahead. She died at age 85 in 1987. She was born in 02. My father was born in 1896. So again, she had a long, long, lonely life in many ways. And we were very close, obviously, being basically each other's family. I just thought I'd clarify those two situations. And the point of today's thing, those of you who go to the theater a lot, there's a wonderful play called It Can't Happen Here. It was also a movie. People used to say, oh, these things can't happen here. Whether it was 1939, 1940, when you still had a Nazi Bund broadcasting on the radio, damning and killed all the Jews here in the United States. We still had a situation where we had, luckily we just survived, had a situation where so many things have been happening that, again, things that we never thought could happen here with our Constitution and our 250 years of being the world's #1 democracy. So I've always fought for that, whether it was in the Army, whether it was in jobs, whether I helped hospitals or museums, whether they're in Japan or wherever they happen to be. It was always a question of these are institutions led by people who give a damn about the world. So again, if there's anything else to be clarified, read my memoirs. I'm still working on them. I love you all madly, and the pussycats and the puppy dog.
I love you too, Grandpa. We have two more questions. The next question is for everyone, which is, why did you decide to participate in this project? So anyone and everyone can share if they'd like. I can start if that's helpful. I decided to participate in this project because it was thrust upon me. No, because I think that what the Mendelssohn Academy and what Jutta and her team are doing is really, really wonderful. And has meant so much to our family over the years, and I think has, at least for me, has really been such a gift in terms of being able to have a better understanding of our family, not just from like Grandpa's memories and our memories through other members of our family, but having some like concrete evidence that like, oh, we were here, like, and that like this family existed in another time and place. Can you hear me? You can't hear me, can you? Okay. We good now? We hear me? Great. Right, so having documentation has felt like it sort of, I've always had the feelings behind our family history, but having the documentation makes it feel even more real, and something to grasp onto. And again, like proof evidence that we were here, right? The Nazis tried to erase the Jews. They tried to erase our family. And they were successful in a lot of ways. And so it's such a privilege and a gift to have a group of people who are from Halberstadt and who are dedicated to uncovering and memorializing our family and our family's history, and really see us and the Jews who live there as like such an important piece of their current community. And so I really wanted to do whatever I could in my capacity here in the United States to help them continue on in that mission. And of course, to help Grandpa too. Anyone else like to share? You guys keep raising your hands at the same damn time. Okay, here, and Allison.
So really, I wanted to be here because this is what we do. We show up. And I wanted Maya to feel supported, and I wanted Grandpa to feel supported. And you know, one of the things that before I sort of said yes, I'm going to do my best to be there. I asked Maya, because I hadn't seen a lot of responses, and I said, Maya, who's coming? And because it's important to me that it's one for all and all for one. So this is just what we do and what we're going to do again tomorrow for Thanksgiving. We show up. And I think that that's something that's been instilled in us from both sides of our family, including Grandma's mom. We've always been there to support each other.
Before the next person go, I just want to say that it was very interesting because most people responded to me individually and not to the whole thread, which was great. What it told me though was that, people responded to me pretty immediately, but again, it was individually, and I think that was that people wanted to show up and people were excited about the idea. But I think that because this is a somewhat sensitive and emotional conversation, that it came with a sense of vulnerability, which is okay. Would anyone else like to share? Oh, Uncle Daniel, I know you raised your hand.
I think everything's really been said. Of course we wanted to participate. Of course we wanted to support Grandpa and support you. And thank you for putting this together and organizing, Maya. But part of it also is because we're all continuing to learn. And Chloe made the comment that she's hearing a lot of this for the first time today. So am I, Chloe. Even today, Grandpa has told us things that I hadn't heard before. And so it's really, that's part of the reason that, we all want to know, we all want to share, we all never want to forget. So of course we were going to participate. Of course there was some reticence and some sensitivity, but I've also learned even more both from Grandpa and from all of you in terms of your perspectives. And to me, that's why I wanted to be here.
Thank you. All right, I think I saw Chloe's hand go up first.
Yeah, going off of that, I was actually hesitant to join because I didn't know a lot, and I know that a lot of you guys have been to Germany. I've been to Halberstadt and have learned a lot from Grandpa and have had individual talks with him, but I ultimately joined so that I could learn about it and I could connect more to all of my cousins and to Grandpa and Grandma and everyone in the family. So that's why I joined.
Thank you. All right, Sam.
I echo what everyone else has said about, being supportive and how, we all are there for each other. And I think that being here for each other when we're, discussing a very, emotional and thing that puts us all in a very vulnerable position, it's important to kind of all be there for each other. But in addition to that, I feel like, this is us, as a family kind of telling our story about how, we became the family that we are. And in a way, this recording is going to become a part of our history. And I wanted to be a part of that. This is something that is, we can have and we can share with our, children, and not every person on this call is going to be around forever. And, this is something that we can share with the people who come after us, to show that this was, this is something that was important to us, and to show how we interact with each other and how we can talk about these things. And I thought it was really important to me to be part of that, new part of our history.
Thanks, Sam. Does anyone else want to share? Mom? Hold on, you're not muted yet.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that first to support Grandpa and Maya, you in your endeavors, thank you. And second, for healing for the entire family, going backwards and going forwards, because this is really how it's done. And also to say something about the Mendelssohn Foundation, because they are really giving us a model in how we might act in some ways, as sort of counter to bystanders, because it's a way of taking responsibility. And we in our country have some things to take responsibility for it as well. And that's another way that we can take values forward. So there were actually so many reasons to be here. So thank you.
Thanks, Mom. Would anyone else like to share? All right, then. We will move on to our last question, which is for Grandpa. And it is, what do you want to pass on to the next generations for the future? Give me 1 second, you're about to be unmuted. There we go. Oh, Grandpa, do you need me to repeat the question?
We're leaving?
No.
We're leaving, yes?
No, we're not leaving.
Oh.
We have one more question.
Oh,
The last question is for you, and it's, what do you want to pass on to the next generations for the future?
I didn't, at whom is that directed?
It's directed to you. Do you want me to repeat it?
Let me hear it again, yeah.
Sure. So the last question is, what do you want to pass on to the next generations for the future?
The fact that history never ends. It repeats itself, but it's life. And what you guys are doing, our kids, our grandkids, is the best examples of trying, again, looking forward to Tikkun Olam, help cure the world, but we start with ourselves and ours at home. And I love you all madly, but also I'm extremely proud of all of you, and I'm sure that Grandma feels the same way as I do. We talk about this often enough. You are quite a bunch, and we're so happy that we had all of you. So the lesson for, in a sense, for the future, as I see it, is that it can happen here, and your lives are what you make of them under any kind of circumstances. Keep in mind that while there are some major problems with the fact that young people whose minds are developing as preens, as prees, or as preteens, or as teens, are at the moment in stress, as we all are, when you think back not that long ago of the Jewish children who were hiding in basements, cold, no food, not knowing whether the knock on the door meant they were going to be killed by Gestapo agents coming to the door, literally. There's some of those still alive today. So everything is in perspective, and the idea that we can do things on our own but also help each other is so important, and as an ongoing basis. And what you guys are doing makes Grandma and me very proud. Thank you. And I love you all madly. And Maya, thank you for taking the time. I know you were basically sleeping and looking at comic books otherwise. So thank you, sweetheart. And look forward to what has to happen next with this document.
Thanks, Grandpa. And on that note, I echo what Grandpa said. Thank you, everyone. And I love you all so much for taking out almost 3 hours of your day today to be together. And so, yeah, that's the end here. I'm going to stop recording. No one get off just yet, just in case something terrible happens. Okay, so, because wouldn't it be fun if it just stopped and it all just was gone? Okay, here we go. I'm going to stop the recording on my end, Mom. Yep.